Tessa Hughes-Freeland has been working with film for many years and is considered a member of the Cinema of Transgression movement. Her films have screened internationally in museums, galleries, and CD bars, including MoMA, MoCA, the Whitney, the New Museum, KW Institute for Contemporary Art, La Cinématique Française, and Seoul Museum of Art. She has presented gallery installations in New York and Scandinavia. Hughes Freeland has been a juror for several festivals and has curated programs for a number of museums, including MoMA, the New Museum, and the Museum of Sex. She was also president of the board of directors for the New York Filmmakers Cooperative for several years. And I'm so excited, Tessa, to have you with me today to learn more about you and your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tegan. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. As I was saying to you before we started recording here, I came across your work somehow through a friend, and I was very intrigued by it, and I wanted to reach out to you to learn more about what it is that you do. And if you don't mind me getting started, Tessa, can I ask what exactly the transgression movement in art even is?
Well, the cinema of transgression movement was specifically contrived as a movement at a particular time in the 80s in New York City. And it was a sort of fabricated movement helmed by one particular filmmaker who wanted to try to gel some filmmakers together by means of writing a manifesto. Otherwise, I don't think that there was really, I mean, it was sort of endemic of a zeitgeist at the time. Like if you think about it at that time, tattooing wasn't legal. Um, sex work wasn't viewed in the same way that it's viewed now. A lot of things that are considered more mainstream or acceptable now were considered marginal at that time. And so I think there were a lot of people, filmmakers and artists who were working at the fringes of society, let's say, so that probably characterizes the nature of the work to some degree. It's people challenging norms, challenging convention, and trying to work in a way that goes beyond normal expectations.
Was that at that time maybe considered underground or that's what I think of. I think of the word underground when I think of that. Tessa, at that time, was that um, something that a lot of people were exploring? How did one sort of find themselves in that particular movement?
Well, I can only speak for myself, and I
Right.
was living downtown, and I was making films, and I was making films with practically no budget. So let's call them no budget underground films. And there were several people in the community downtown who were making films. And there's a tradition of underground film. And in the 70s, well, underground film and experimental film are not quite the same genre, but in the 70s there was this very abstract filmmaking that was very almost academic and very formal. And there was a reaction against that in the 80s, and towards the reaction moved towards film that was very figurative and very visceral. And I think that a lot of the visceral nature of the film was a reaction to the fact that we were going through an AIDS epidemic at the time. And a lot of our friends were dying. It was just a very trying time. But I don't know how I became a part of anything. I mean, I think I feel more a part of a community of filmmakers who was doing work at that time. And by the nature of it being, of a low production value, all DIY, it was sort of tied to, sort of punk aesthetic that preceded it in the late 70s, of which, I'm a part of too.
Right.
And it was pre-digital, so it was just very scrappy, basically. And at the time there were a lot of nightclubs, and most of us lived a nightlife, and the disciplines in different arts like music and performance and filmmaking blended in that environment. So there was a lot of cross-pollination between those disciplines. So, musicians were in films and filmmakers were showing films with musicians and performers were in the mix as well. So it was a very fluid situation.
Thank you for explaining that. And was the genre that you were in taught? May I ask how you were taught? Is it something that was taught in schools, or is it just a matter of the culture that you were in more so?
At that time,
Yes.
do you mean filmmaking as a whole or that
Um,
particular type of filmmaking?
I would say both, actually.
Okay. Well, filmmaking was taught in schools. I learned to make films using my father's camera. I'm a self-taught filmmaker basically. And but in terms of the underground was not really accepted in academia at the time. Um, Jean Genet was barely considered a filmmaker, and I think he's wonderful. So, nowadays, of course, the cinema of transgression is taught in colleges as a genre of filmmaking, so that's how time has its way of creating history.
That's fascinating. And actually, Tessa, that was one of my questions, if the transgressive genre is actually still in active existence and how that's evolved to now be taught in mainstream schools.
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really see it around. I mean, I know people who, I mean, I guess the way that, when I've been asked to speak at film shows and the like, people always say, well, how do we do, how can we be this way? And I'm always encouraging people to just make it, just do it, just have that DIY aesthetic and do it yourself. Don't try to make it like a short Hollywood narrative. Just do whatever you want to do. Get a bunch of friends together, use your iPhone, whatever, just do it. So it really has to do with an immediacy and a sort of urgency. And I think that comes across in the energy and the filmmaking.
Incredible. I've actually heard several artists I admire use the term urgency, so I appreciate that. That makes so much sense. And Tessa, has filmmaking always been your favorite, your primary genre of interest?
I've also written, I've also been a writer,
Amazing.
and I like writing and I like working with film imagery as well. But yeah, I'm not a painter, and that's my main discipline. Yeah.
Wonderful. And are you still active in those
Yes,
disciplines?
absolutely. Yeah. I also take photographs, of course, because then that's still imagery that I use in my films. And yeah, I'm still active. My methods of working, of course, have changed over the years. Now I'm working on, I guess you call it cinematic sculpture, which is using a number of different projections on different shaped screens, which has evolved from a practice of multiple projection performance that I've done for years and years, and is the concept behind the collage films that you've seen that I make. Those
Amazing.
are utilizing a number of different projectors, incorporating found footage, original footage, as well as handmade slides and any other materials that I feel like using, prisms and pieces of glass, mirrors, etc., to create an image that's alive and moving.
Incredible. Your work is just so incredible. And I have to ask, if you don't mind, if there is anybody who inspired you? Who are some of your favorite
Oh,
artists?
that's a good question.
Yeah,
Well, I do like Jean Cocteau very much. I
you
also like
mentioned.
Kenneth Anger, Joseph Cornell, um, and uh, Maya Deren, and yeah, mainly those are my main influences, I suppose. And then
Okay.
also influences that aren't particularly film.
So, may I ask some examples?
Well, let me think. In literature, well, who do I like? And all these books I read when I was a teenager that I can hardly remember.
Sure, sure.
Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf is definitely an inspiration there. And I also like fairy tales. Those are kind of an inspiration to me actually as well. And myths, Greek myths,
Amazing.
folk tales.
I can see those themes in your work actually, so that does not surprise me to hear that. Were fairy tales sort of always, as long as you can remember, being sort of a theme in your work from the time you were a
Um,
child?
well, not always, not
Okay.
always. I mean, I sort of came to those later and, but I'm interested also in ritual as well. And I see those as sort of connected actually.
Fantastic. Do you mind expanding on that just a little more, what you mean by that?
Well, I think there's a process in a fairy tale where there's a story and there's a sort of a moral behind the story, but often there's a horror involved. Like if there's a book that was kind of impressed me when I was a child called Straw Peter, which is a book of cautionary tales, ultimately like German cautionary tales. And in that, there's always some sort of horror. And I think in the horror or the moral, there's always some kind of ritualistic connection to it. Like when you think of what happens to Hansel and Gretel, they have to go into the oven. They have to
Yeah.
get, or there's the disguising of the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood.
Mhm.
And for the bears, they're trying out all the beds. That's sort of ritualistic, so it's sort of tangential, but I see it as connected.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, Tess, I just have a couple more questions for you here. It's just I'm learning so much. Thank you. Um, are there ever lulls where you go through periods of a lack of creativity or a stop? And how do you recommend that people might get through that? Do you just ride that out? Should you be actively pursuing that? How do you feel about what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have had lulls like that, lulls in creativity. And
Right.
what I did was I chose to do something that was sort of a meditative practice, and it was related to filmmaking. But what I did was I made these film fans, which are objects, made of film. So rather than being active, which is what filmmaking ultimately is, I was sitting down and working in a very precise, detailed, and focused way. And that enabled me to sort of to clear my head and then I came back to having more inspiration and my imagination flowing again. But it was a time where it wasn't flowing. So I just chose to do something that was very disciplined in a way.
That
And that was what worked for me. I think, anything can work for anybody. Maybe exercising works or, you know, taking a walk, whatever works. But for me, that was what I did. I chose to do that and make a body of work in that way.
incredible. Thank you for sharing it with the world. It's a true delight and sort of going to that, Tessa, where I know I've seen your website and I've been on your Instagram. Do you really showcase your work? Where is the best place for people to see and support the work that you do?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it's sort of piecemeal. Sometimes in the last few years, I've had a couple of exhibitions in nonprofit spaces, which is a different kind of um, venue to see film in. In fact, it's more of an exhibition space. But usually my films are shown in nonprofit spaces and screening rooms around the country that specialize in non-commercial films, like film venues like the Film Anthology Archives in New York and the Cinematography in Paris, and people who put together some festivals that have shorts programs. It's really quite random. And it's often, individuals who choose to take a sort of curatorial or programming onto themselves who will contact me and say, we're putting together a screening or putting together an exhibition, and we'd like to show one of your films in a group show. Otherwise, I'm invited to do a screening and a conversation in an institution or in connection with a university or a theatre somewhere, movie theatre. So,
Wonderful.
the best place to see my work is kind of my website. And if you're really interested, I have films on Vimeo, but I haven't created a channel. But I think about it sometimes.
Wonderful. Absolutely. I totally think that would be a great idea if you do that, and I will subscribe and be checking all of them out. Uh, Thank you so much, Tessa, for your time today. And if you don't mind me asking, this was just such a wonderful conversation that this question just sort of popped into my head before I let you go. For artists who feel that, they don't have confidence there, or they don't think that they're that good, or the world doesn't want to see what they have to offer, or is there any advice that you have for those times or those moments in those feelings, if you've ever felt that way? I'm not sure.
Well, I think everybody has something to offer if they're creative in any way, and I think most people are creative in some way.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's not even necessary to try to think about the end result or how it's going to be shown or how it's going to be presented. I mean, there are many artists who have never shown their work, and then they're sort of discovered after they're dead. It serves to be a private world, and it can be a refuge as well. I think that's the driving force for many artists, that it's sort of the last refuge, in terms of private space and just being expressive in your own way, in your own world.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time today, Tessa, to educate me and others. It was an amazing conversation, and I'm absolutely just in awe of your work. Thank you for your contributions and for all that you do.
Well, thank you for asking me, Tegan. I hope that I was able to give you some insight into my work and that it was interesting to you in some way. Thank
It
you.
was incredible. Thank you so much for your time today.